Hi, everybody. My name is Linda Abraham, and I am the president of Accepted and the moderator for today's webinar. I want to welcome all of you to How to Get into Medical School with Low Stats, to be presented by Alicia Nimonkar. Before we start, there are a few items I'd like to go over that will help you get the most out of the webinar, and one that will help us improve future webinars. So number one, if you have not yet downloaded your webinar worksheet, please take a second to do so and print it out. Here is the link. This is for the worksheet. I know I already posted it for you, but let's do it one more time. Again, my recommendation is that you download it, print it out, and use it to take notes. Now, Alicia may ask a few questions during the presentation and ask you to raise your hand in response. You can do so by clicking on the hand icon on your control panel, which I'm sure you know about because we're all Zoom experts at this point. And let's try it out right now. If you are attending this webinar because you want to become a physician, your dream career, please raise your hand. Great. Most of you are here, know how to use Zoom, and are here for the right reasons. Wonderful. We're going to ask some questions of you during the webinar. Please use the chat window to respond. And we are also going to have a Q&A at the end of the webinar, and you are more than welcome to use the question window for your questions. So please feel free to, again, the chat window is for your answers to our questions. The question window is for your questions, which we're going to answer at the end. When you leave, you're going to receive a brief survey. Please fill it out. We value your feedback, and I review the responses, and we use those responses to change and hopefully improve the webinars or to sometimes add new ones. Finally, I'm thrilled to introduce Alicia Nimonkar, who will present How to Get into Medical School with Low Stats this evening. Alicia started advising acceptance clients in 2012. She immediately was earning rave reviews from her clients and has been earning them ever since. Prior to joining Accepted, she both evaluated applications and advised med school applicants as director of the UC Davis Postbac program. She brings enormous insight and medical school process to our webinar today. Without further ado, Alicia Nimonkar, and get accepted to med school with low stats.
Thank you for joining us, everyone. We're going to start by having a poll. And the question is, are you a first-time applicant or a reapplicant?
Here you go. Are you a first-time applicant or reapplicant? Let's see, we have now, great, we're at 86% having voted, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, now 89%. And 56% of you are first-time applicants and 44 are reapplicants.
Excellent, thank you for voting. And how many people are planning on applying to medical school this cycle? If you give us a show of hands.
Okay, let's show of hands. How many of you are planning to apply this cycle? Raise your hand if you are. We have about we're getting close to 50%. Okay, but just a little under 50%.
Excellent, excellent. And another poll, which one of your scores, GPA or MCAT, makes you worry the most?
And both is also an option.
So MCAT, GPA, or both?
And with 82% having voted, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So it's 29% are concerned about the MCAT, 50% are concerned about the GPA, and 21% are concerned about both.
Thank you. That's very helpful information. Okay, so getting into our webinar. So there are two reasons why applying with low scores can hurt you. The first is that the MCAT is being used to assess how well a student will perform in their first year of medical school, and that's according to research in medical education. The second reason is that GPA is a less reliable indicator of academic ability since every campus has so much variability in how challenging their coursework may be. But it is still used to determine how strong a student's commitment is to completing their long-term academic goals. So what is a low MCAT score, you may ask? According to the 2019 AAMC infographic sheet, they provide the range of scores for students accepted into medical school. So you might be shocked, your jaws might drop open, be prepared, sit down if you're standing. So the lowest MCAT score of someone accepted into medical school was a 483. It's quite shocking, I know. The average was a 512. And of course, the max is 528, which is a perfect score. So it is quite shocking. A 483 is quite low. Applying with an MCAT score below 500 is considered low. But you can still get accepted with a low score, as you can see in the data, right? And this is especially true if you consider applying to DO programs, or of course, Caribbean schools. So what can you do about a low MCAT score? So the first option is to consider retaking the MCAT if you have the energy, time, and money. In over 15 years of experience advising students, one thing that I've noticed among all students who I've spoken to who've earned a perfect or near perfect score, and you can believe anytime I come across a student like that, I ask them lots and lots of questions. The one thing they all have in common is that they stopped everything else and just studied for the MCAT for 2 to 3 months. So if that's possible, right, just being able to focus your attention can make a huge difference on your score. And that can be a luxury. Time is a luxury. If you have to work multiple jobs, and I know it's difficult to manage all those responsibilities, if there's any way you can at least cut back on your hours or find some kind of a compromise, that can make a big difference. The next strategy is to use your practice exam scores to decide whether to take the exam again or not. And those are important to use in this decision. If possible, one of the best ways you can decide how much time you need to study, you can take a full-timed MCAT at the very beginning before you've even started studying and use that number as a control, right? That without studying, this would be the score that you would get. And that can really give you a good idea of exactly how much time you're going to need to prepare for it. The next strategy I recommend, right, is making sure that you have an increasing trend in your scores. It's okay to retake the MCAT, right? Like it's okay to do that. However, you want to make sure that you have an increasing trend in your scores. And there is a limit on the number of times you can take it per year and in your lifetime. So, keep an eye on that. But whatever you do, make sure you have an increasing trend in your scores. A decreasing trend will hurt you. And I haven't, in my experience, seen someone accepted into medical school with a decreasing trend to MD programs. We did have somebody, you probably remember, Linda, a few years ago, who got accepted to a DO, I think with a 2-point drop in his MCAT score. Do you remember?
I think it was more than 2.
I think it was 2. It wasn't, because it wasn't a big drop.
I remember somebody getting accepted to a DO program with a big drop, but we'll go back to
really?
Yeah, but we'll discuss that later.
Do you remember do you remember how many points?
I remember 10.
Oh, I've never seen that before. Okay. Yeah, that wasn't my student. That's impressive. Yeah. So,
but it was he started with an okay MCAT score and then had a big drop.
And did he have a good reason for why it dropped so much?
Not really.
Oh no, gosh. But it looks like he got into DO.
He got into DO.
It all worked out.
Yeah.
Okay, so it is possible to get into DO programs with a decreasing trend. Okay, so the next possibility is to compensate with a higher GPA. So if you have a higher GPA, that will help for sure. Okay, so the place to explain the reason why you might have a low score would be your personal statement and or your secondary essays. So you'd want to state the facts of the obstacles that you encountered in preparing for the MCAT if that was the issue, right? You don't want to give excuses, you just want to share the facts. So we're going to talk about GPA now. So what is a low GPA? So according to the AAMC Orange Sheet in 2019, the lowest GPA of people accepted was a 3.73 for matriculants. So for applicants, the average, right, was a 3.59. And for matriculants, the average, I'm sorry, not the lowest, the average was a 3.73. I know from my own experience, and you've probably seen this too, Linda, that I've had many, I would say actually most of my clients have probably been accepted with lower than a 3.73.
Yeah.
Is that true for you and the data you've seen?
Well, I think it's true for your clients.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, exactly. So I had someone 2 weeks ago accepted to a DO program with a 2.7 science GPA and a 3.84 cumulative GPA. So to DO programs, you're much more likely to get accepted with lower scores. And I believe the lowest to an MD last cycle, I think I had someone with a 2.8 science GPA and a 3.0 cumulative GPA, but she did apply as a disadvantaged applicant. And I think that's an important point to make.
Did she do a postbac?
I'm sure she probably did.
Yeah, that's what I would think.
Must have. Yeah, she definitely had an increasing trend. Okay, so the point I want to make is don't be discouraged by the MSAR data because it really doesn't include the full range of MCAT scores and GPAs of students accepted. So please don't panic when you read the MSAR. And you can use, right, the 10th percentile, the 25th percentile numbers to, base your school selection on. Because that gives you just a better idea of the numbers they accept, but not the full picture. So applying with a score below a 3.0 is considered low. What can you do about a low GPA? The first option is informal postbac coursework. And I've written a book about postbac programs about, gosh, is it 5 years now, Linda?
It could be. It could
It's been
be
about 5 years.
Yeah.
And this book details all of the informal options as well as the formal options for post-baccalaureate coursework. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term, post-baccalaureate coursework means exactly what it sounds like. So post, right after baccalaureate. So any coursework you take after graduating from your bachelor's degree, anything you take after that point at the undergraduate level is considered post-bac coursework. And it's confusing because some DO programs call their graduate programs post-bacs, but they're actually graduate programs. I don't know why they do that. It's really confusing. If the coursework is graduate level, it's not going to help you address a low undergraduate GPA. So if you are someone with a low undergrad GPA, make sure that if you're doing informal postbac coursework or formal postbac coursework, that it's at the undergraduate level. And then that way it will calculate into your cumulative GPA for undergrad. So the first option is informal postbac, which is just like it sounds, you doing your own coursework, enrolling as a second bac student on any campus. And now it's easier than ever because everything's online. Most programs are online now. So you could easily enroll on any campus pretty much to take additional coursework. So you want to take classes that you haven't already taken. So upper division biosci, like endocrinology, immunology, any courses like that. Anatomy physiology is especially helpful if you haven't taken it in preparation for med school, and histology. Histology is hard to find, but that's a really good one before med school. Formal postbac programs, There are so many across the country now. In my book, I detailed quite a few, but there are even more. In 5 years, there are so many more that have become available. The only issues with formal postbac coursework would be you want to have competitive numbers for their program. So if you have an especially low GPA, you might be better off taking your own informal postbac coursework, because you don't have to apply for a program. You can just register on a campus, start taking classes. With a formal program, right, you have to submit an application. They'll probably have an interview process. It'll take, a period of 3 to 6 or longer months before from when you submit the application to when you start their program. And so if you don't want to lose time, if you know that you already have a super low score and you're not competitive for a postbac, you can always do your own postbac coursework and then apply to a formal program once your numbers are competitive. Or if you're confident in your number, if you're doing really well in your coursework and your numbers are all increasing, then you could probably just apply directly to medical school. You don't have to do a formal postbac program to get accepted into medical school. The third option is completing a master's degree, so a special master's degree program. And many programs, have conditional acceptances or linkage agreements. If you score a certain GPA by a certain date, you can be guaranteed an interview. There are great programs out there with options like that. So if your GPA is on like the higher range, it's not as low. I would say like a 3.5, 3.6. Doing a special master's degree program could be very helpful. Some of them actually allow you to take classes with the first year students, medical students. And so if they have a conditional acceptance and you meet the GPA requirements, and if they have an MCAT requirement, if you meet those, right, then you are guaranteed an acceptance. Right, that's the nature of a conditional acceptance program. Or sometimes you're just guaranteed an interview. Like they don't give you the guaranteed acceptance. They just know, hey, if you get these GPAs, these MCAT numbers, you're guaranteed an interview. If accepted into one of those programs, you would actually start your second year of medical school and you would end up with a master's degree. So it's really a fantastic option. If you have a GPA that's not that low, but still like considered low by your top choice programs. Okay, so those are the best options for if you have a low GPA. So when applying with low scores, I would say that it's especially important to focus on the following sections of your application to make them as strong as possible. So first would be the personal statement, because this is where you have the option of explaining what happened. And I've seen it be extremely successful that you can anticipate any questions they would have, any concerns that a selection committee would have. If you address those up front, right? If you address those weaknesses before they even ask the question, it looks honest and straightforward. And if you can demonstrate improvement, that's even better. The activities section essays, those are a great place for them to see, if you overcommitted yourself and took on way too many volunteer activities, like they could see, how thinly you spread yourself. But of course, you've got to demonstrate improvement. And of course, then the statement of disadvantage. So this would be the place you could describe any issues, socioeconomic, any barriers you encountered, any things that would have hurt your ability to perform at your best. So in the personal statement, the best strategy I could give you would be to focus on your strengths and then to address or discuss any weaknesses as long as you've improved in those areas, right? You don't want to bring attention to a low score if you haven't improved it, or you don't want to bring attention to a weakness that hasn't been resolved. The best way to do would be to you describe the weakness and then have the way that you've improved. So for example, if you have a low MCAT score the first time, retaking it and sharing your new MCAT score. For the activities section, for those of you listening, Why do you think the activity section is so important when applying with low numbers?
Could you respond to that in the chat window, please? Why do you think the activity section is so important or particularly important when applying with low numbers? Okay, Morgan says shows commitment to medicine. Okay. Let's see who else is going to come in. Let's see. All right, here we go. Can show your strengths in other areas. Good. It explains what is taking time away from MCAT and GPA. Good, Erica. Shows how you might be a good physician outside of academics. Excellent, Simran.
Yeah, these are all fantastic reasons.
Right.
Yeah, you guys get it. It just adds depth to your application, right? So as you said, it demonstrates how committed you are, especially to working in the community. It can show, right, that you're someone who overcommits yourself, that you're passionate about helping others. And don't you secretly want your doctor to be someone who overcommits, right?
To you.
Yeah, right. And it's important to highlight this strength. And sometimes, that the best way to do it is to show rather than tell. So, right, actions speak louder than words. And so demonstrating how you've done that through your activities will be the most compelling and convincing way to do that. Also, you can demonstrate what you've learned through your activities and how you've improved your time management skills. So for those of you listening, if you were evaluating applications at a medical school, imagine yourself on the other side of the table. What would you look for in the application of someone with numbers that might be lower than their average?
In the chat window, please. What would you look for? Good leadership, clinical skills, suggests Morgan. Simran adds commitment to helping their communities. Erica added all of the above. Aaliyah says resilience, tenacity, a longstanding commitment to their goals through their activities. Wenley writes volunteer hours, both clinical, non-clinical.
Yeah, you guys are all right on. Yeah, absolutely. All of these are accurate. I would say resilience is a huge one.
Yeah.
So any way that you can demonstrate resilience is hugely impactful and will make a big difference. Okay, so next we're going to talk about the statement of disadvantage. So if this applies to you, right, it's often a challenging section to complete, but it will only help explain why you've struggled academically or why you were not able to focus on studying only on the MCAT. For example, if you could not afford a test prep program or were not able to take time off of work to study. So I'm going to define disadvantage because you might not know whether or not this applies to you. So if you've experienced any form of social, economic, or educational disadvantage at any time in your life, you can apply to medical school as disadvantaged. That being said, they base it strongly on economics. So they'll look at your family's income from birth to college. They'll look at the average income, as you were growing up. They want to see if your income was lower than the poverty level, or if you received food stamps or lived in Section 8 housing. They base it mostly on economics. That being said, if you experience social as well as educational, you want to cover all three. I haven't seen people be successful in covering just social or just educational, but if you've experienced economic in any combination of the three, you should definitely include them. Social disadvantage would be things like growing up in a single parent household or being treated differently due to ethnicity, language, religion, sexuality, etc. Economic disadvantage would be like having a family income below the poverty level, living in Section 8 housing, relying on food stamps. Educational disadvantage would be attending low-performing public schools or having a learning disability. And I've had someone apply just with having a learning disability, and it didn't work out for them. And I've also had someone apply talking about growing up in a single parent home because their parents divorced. And I also saw that not be successful. So the people who successfully apply as disadvantaged are those who definitely are economically disadvantaged, and then some combination of either social and or educational. So will anybody be completing this section of the application? Can you give us a show of hands?
Oh, quite a few. About 1/4 of attendees.
Oh, wow. Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
So, completing this additional essay is only going to help you if it's appropriate for you to apply as disadvantaged. So if you're applying as disadvantaged because your parents got divorced, but there are no other forms of disadvantage, I wouldn't do it. Or if you have a learning disability and that's the only reason, I also wouldn't do it. But if, economic disadvantage applies to you, definitely apply as disadvantaged, or, any combination of those three if it includes economic. So the strategies for completing this section include stating the facts. You don't want to tell a story here. You don't want to exaggerate anything. You really just want to state the facts that, we relied on food stamps, we lived in Section 8 housing, or we lived in a neighborhood that had issues with drugs and gang violence, right? You want to just state the facts. You also don't want to copy and paste from this section to the personal statement and vice versa. You want to put things in completely different terms. And focusing on what you gained from these hardships, right? Ending the statement of disadvantage on a positive note is often the best strategy that I've seen. So making sure that even though you might be covering difficult topics in this essay, like abuse or struggling to make ends meet, struggling to for your family to put food on the table, having some kind of gratitude or ending on some kind of a positive note about the resilience or the positive characteristics you've gained as a result definitely helps. So any questions so far?
There are a few that have come in, but the most recent one is from a Jay, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name. And he asked, would an immigrant be considered disadvantaged? I have had a hard time trying to integrate into the system.
It could. So it could apply if your family was in financial hardship. So, if you qualified for free lunches at school, if your family relied on, federal aid or funding or support, if you qualified for like state programs, like, in California, they have programs for families with children, WIC, which is wonderful. So it's often easy to prove disadvantage because, right, if you qualified for any of these programs, that's a good indicator that you should apply as disadvantaged.
And let's see, there's a couple more along these lines. If you grew up with both parents, but one was in and out of rehab, is that still considered disadvantaged if it affected economic status?
It definitely sounds like it could. So, if there was a lot of instability in terms of some years, your family was stable, other years, your family could barely afford to put food on the table, absolutely, you could apply as disadvantaged, definitely.
All right. And then the last one, we're going to move on. Can having special needs siblings and being a caretaker for them be considered disadvantaged?
That's a really interesting question. I haven't seen anybody apply with just that situation, but it might depend on the details. So if due to the cost of supporting family members with disabilities is high and impacted your family's ability to be financially stable, then most definitely, right? Like if you struggled to meet your basic needs because you were covering costs for siblings with disabilities, yes, yeah, that would apply.
Okay. Now we're gonna move on, but a couple of you had additional questions related to whether you should apply or not apply for the FAP program, and we're going to get back to them at the end. Alicia, I think you should move forward. Okay.
Okay, excellent. So next we're going to talk about school selection. So this section is especially important when applying with low numbers because you can maximize your chances of acceptance by applying to the right schools. And in 15 years, I've learned which programs are more likely to accept students with low scores. So for those of you listening, how many schools did you apply to if you are a reapplicant?
In the chat window, please.
So if you are a reapplicant, how many schools did you apply to?
A lot. Okay, 3 is one.
Okay.
14.
What's a lot?
I was going to ask the same question, Erica. What's a lot? Can you give us a rough estimate? You might have wanted to blot the number out, but 10 plus says Erica. Sarah says 15. Yeah. All right, so we have 3, 14, 15, 10 plus.
I would actually say that those were not.
Somebody else said they applied. Yeah. They already did the primary 38 MD programs.
So often I see a pattern, you probably see this too, Linda, of people who apply to too few schools and people who apply to too many, who spread themselves so thin that they just can't return the secondaries because they have so many, right? So you want to be right in the middle there. You don't want to be on the extreme ends of the spectrum.
Not too hot, you don't not too cold.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Porridge, right?
Not too cold. You don't want to apply to 3, but you also don't apply probably to 40, right? So anywhere from 20 to 25 schools, in my experience, is a very good number because then you'll have the time to actually return those secondaries and hopefully you're pre-writing them. But that's a very reasonable number. And it's a numbers game. You're much more likely to get accepted the more schools you apply to, but you just don't apply to too many. So if applicable, you can apply for the fee assistance program called the FAP on the AAMC website. It includes a reduced fee for the MCAT, and you can apply to up to 20 schools, and the application fee is waived, and the secondary application fee is also waived. When choosing schools, you can evaluate your stats and compare to the medical schools you would like to attend. But again, I want to stress, I have so many students who get completely devastated when they look at the MSAR. They feel shocked by how high those numbers are. But I do just want to remind you that those numbers in the MSAR, the medical school admissions requirements handbook, which is now online, and you'll need to purchase access to it. I think it's about $30 now. Those numbers are self-reported by the schools. So just keep that in mind. They're not sharing the full range of students accepted. And I'm sure you've seen this, Linda, but I routinely, like every year, have students accepted with lower scores than are posted on the MSAR.
I haven't checked that, but that's interesting.
Yes, every year for 15 years, I have seen students accepted with much lower scores than in the MSAR. So I just want to encourage you not to take those numbers to heart, right? Don't be shocked by them, right? Okay. So according to AMCAS, for the 2019-20 application cycle, we're going to share the numbers of the applicants and matriculants. So for applicants, the average MCAT was a 506.1, the average cumulative GPA was a 3.58, and the average science GPA was a 3.48. So for matriculants, so students accepted, the average MCAT was a 511.5, the average cumulative GPA was a 3.73, and the average science GPA was a 3.66. And there's a great table. I can share it with you if you don't have it, Linda. It's called Chance at Acceptance Table. And it's wonderful because it has GPA on the left and MCAT score on the top. And you sort of see where they meet. And it gives you the percent chance you have at acceptance. So it's a good sort of guide, but again, take those numbers with a grain of salt, right?
Is that at specific schools or overall?
It's published by the AAMC. I can actually put it in the chat if you want to share it with everyone.
Sure.
Yeah, but it's wonderful to look at. I've had a lot of students who felt shy about applying, but once they felt uncertain about applying, how good are my chances? But then once they looked at this table, they realized they had a much better chance than they thought. I can't add it to the chat, so I will just email it to you, Linda, if you want to share it.
Okay.
It's a PDF.
All right.
Yeah. Cool. So moving on. Now we're going to look at the osteopathic, so the DO schools acceptance, and for applicants and matriculants, the average MCAT and GPAs. This data is from 2018-19. It's the most recent available on the AACOMAS website. So I apologize, it's 1 year earlier than the AAMC data that we shared. But just keep in mind, they haven't published the 2019-20 numbers yet. And that's normal. They're usually a year behind the AAMC. So for all applicants, the average MCAT was a 501.96. For the average cumulative GPA was a 3.43, and the average science GPA was a 3.3. So for matriculants, students accepted, the average MCAT was a 503.83. And again, notice that these numbers are much lower than those accepted into MD or allopathic programs through AMCAS. So for matriculants, the average MCAT was a 503.83. I'm repeating that. So just keep in mind, if you do have lower scores, applying to DO programs is an excellent option. The average cumulative GPA for matriculants was a 3.54, and the average science GPA was a 3.43. So the best way to learn about programs, to decide if you should apply to them, would be to attend pre-med conferences, to network with other students, and medical school outreach officers. Obviously, those were virtual over the past year. And they might still be virtual on some campuses, or some might be in person now. So check into those, because it's very helpful to learn more about the school. Also, you want to talk to current students or alumni to really find out if it's the campus for you, right? You want honest feedback, right? As honest as possible. Visit medical school campuses if possible. The best way for you to figure out if you could be happy at a school is really to go and see what it feels like to be there. So if that's an option, visit the medical schools nearest you. Also, you'll have a lot more to say about them in your secondary applications if you've actually been there, right? Research schools that specialize in your research interests or fields of interest. Also, I've seen it successful, and you probably have too, Linda, if students have a mentor that attended a particular medical school, or a PI or someone who has closely mentored them or helped them in their studies or in their research. Often that can help, mentioning that person's name if you have their permission to do so. Next, we're going to talk about timeline. So the best possible advice I can give you for timeline is that applying early is critical, especially when applying with lower numbers. So as early as possible, right? I've had students accepted who've applied to AMCAS. End of May is when the application's open now. June, July, and I haven't had anybody accepted recently, in the last 2 years, who's applied in August. Have you seen anybody that happened?
Occasionally, but it's definitely gets tougher as the summer goes on.
Yeah, you don't want to be that person who applies that late. So end of May, safe. June, super safe. July, you're getting to the point where if schools have already found enough students to invite to interview, they might not even read your application. So keep that in mind, right? If you apply in August, chances that they're going to look at your application go down exponentially. So don't put yourself in that position where you put all this time and energy and money into putting together this amazing application, and then nobody even gets to read it, right? That's heartbreaking, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. It's
awful.
It's frustrating, and it's expensive.
It's so frustrating, especially as an advisor, right? Like when you have people apply that late and you're telling them, look, I've never seen anybody get accepted this late. I even had some people apply like September last year. And I think it was because of the
But
pandemic.
last year was an anomalous
Yeah.
cycle.
Last year was weird. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. There's what, like a 20 to 30% increase in applicants at most medical schools last cycle. So it's going to be that much more competitive this year. I'm sure we'll see the numbers when they come out. But I'm sure that pushed, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and GPA scores much higher for an acceptance. So keep that in mind with the current trends, with what's happened with the pandemic, the increasing number of students applying to medical school, or you don't want to put yourself in a position that your application isn't even evaluated. Okay, so any other questions that you guys have?
There are some questions, but why don't we save them for the Q&A that's going to come in a couple of minutes, okay?
Okay, excellent. So I want to thank you all for your time and attention and participation. And we will answer your questions after Linda gives us a short presentation.
Okay. Now, some of you are posting your questions in the chat window. We want to go through as many as possible, and it really helps us if you put them in the question window. Just go much more quickly. Let me ask you right now, what was in the chat window, please? What was, at the risk of driving you folks nuts, what was the most valuable piece of advice, information, or insight that you got from Alicia's presentation this evening? Again, the question is, what was the most valuable piece of advice, information, or insight that you got from Alicia's presentation on applying to med school with low stats? What steps to take if you have a low GPA? Stay calm and have a plan and stick to it. Okay, Shruti. Thank you, Simran. Oh, there's lots. That MSAR doesn't post full range. Whatever is published isn't really what it seems. Information Alicia shared has been comforting. Oh, that's good to know, Sarah. And Melissa wrote the disadvantaged essay option and the tips for the personal statement. Monica wrote, apply early. The reality of MSAR statistics, low MCAT is not the end of the world. Okay, great. Well, thank you for that feedback. That's fantastic. Alicia has given you the what of applying to med schools with low stats, but not the how. And that's really impossible for her or anybody else to give with any depth and specificity, because a webinar like this one, no matter how much we try, it's for the many. And many of you, and there are many of you here, it has to be general. But you are an individual applying to medical school. Each of you has unique talents and strengths, and perhaps a weakness or two. You don't want to let a mistake or blemish prevent you from pursuing the career of your dreams. Your goal, apply confidently and successfully to the best program for you. Now, the medical school application process is grueling. There's no two ways about it. And the stakes are high. You can see the screen, the table on the screen. This was from the application cycle that ended in 2019, this data, the 2020 application cycle, ending in actually the 2020, this is from 2019, 2020. The 2020-21 data obviously isn't out yet, hasn't entirely finished, but the numbers are going to get worse. And the ACOMAS numbers are also fairly similar, with the acceptance rate actually going down. Now, given the complexity of the application process and the high stakes, you need an expert guide who knows the process inside and out and who can support you through this grueling journey. You need Accepted to be your guide, or an Accepted consultant like Alicia. You want a customized approach that fits your needs, not one size fits all. You want options so that if you only need a little bit of help with one element of the application, that's what you'll get. If you're starting from scratch and want comprehensive assistance, that's what you get. You'll have one dedicated advisor who becomes expert in your story and helping you present it. And you get candor and objectivity combined with decades of experience in MBA admissions. Exhibit has guides like Alicia who can advise and mentor you as you choose where to apply, how to mitigate those weaknesses, and how to highlight your strengths, show fit, demonstrate that you'll be a contributor at the medical school of your choice and later on as a professional in your community, and ultimately gain acceptance. Here's what I suggest you do. Visit accepted.com/medical/services. Choose the service that's right for you. Get the guidance you need for that missing how, for that individual guidance, and then go from confusion to clarity and from doubts to confidence. Some of you may say, isn't accepted expensive? Well, quite frankly, so is rejection. Our fees are clear, but the cost of rejection is not quite as obvious. So let's take a look at the risks of not applying with accepted. Reapplication can easily cost a couple $1,000s, and you'll have an additional year of earnings at a much lower level than after you earn your MD or DO degree. And you could be talking tens of thousands of dollars there. And there's even the potential that you could have gotten to a better program with greater lifetime opportunities and even earnings. Every year, we work with applicants who talked to us a year earlier and decided after taking the do-it-yourself approach and getting rejected that they wanted to work with us when they reapplied. We're happy to work with you whether you're a first-time applicant or a reapplicant. It really doesn't matter to us. But those applicants would have been better off working with us initially, financially better off, and so would you. Our own survey of clients shows that our clients enjoy an 80% acceptance rate to MD and DO programs. Actually, I think it was above 80%. But enough from me. What do accepted clients say? Well, here's feedback from one of Alicia's clients. I'm going to read some of it, not all of it. I am very busy because I'm a med student. I was offered 4 interviews total and was accepted to 2 schools. I chose to attend UCF Com in Orlando. I'm eternally grateful to you, Alicia, for all the critical advice and help you gave. I could not have made it through the application process without your help. Thank you again for your patience for truly caring about my success. Now, Alicia is fantastic, but she does book up. And I want you to realize that we have other talented, experienced, knowledgeable consultants who are Alicia's colleagues. So here are a couple of other, a little bit more feedback. This one is for Sydney Foote. I can't believe how well you managed to cut my essay in half without compromising my tone or eliminating the little stories. There are 17 more hours left till the application is due, and I'm not stressed at all because I know I have you by my side with this essay. Or the last one for Dr. Herman Gordon. His ideas and input transferred my essays. I have no idea that his help made a huge difference in the quality of my applications. I would recommend Herman to anyone and everyone. So once again, this is what I recommend you do as a follow-up to today's webinar. We are going to get to Q&A in just a minute. Visit accepted.com/medical/services. Choose the service that's right for you. Get the guidance you need to apply confidently and effectively. And now for your questions. And we have a bunch. You've been a wonderful audience. So Emery asks, what if your overall MCAT score is decent, 509, but one section is low?
So depending on how low, right, it might not hurt you as much as you think. Last cycle, the lowest MCAT score got someone accepted with was a 498 to a DO and to an MD, a 503. So probably much lower than you guys would think.
Right, for sure. So Tiffany asked earlier, if you are considering MD, isn't anything less than a 510 considered a low MCAT?
No. So I've gotten students accepted with much lower scores than a 510 every year to MD.
I think the other part of this is you can have a low score and get accepted.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah. That's really the point here. It's not that the score is low or isn't low. It's that a low score doesn't, in and of itself, depending upon how low, mean you don't have a chance. It's going to, this is the era of holistic review. So it's going to be, what else do you have that shows you can handle medical school? And what experiences and insight and can you demonstrate through your application that say you're going to make a great physician?
It also helps, just a side note, it also helps if you're applying as disadvantaged, you can definitely get accepted with much lower MCAT scores and GPAs.
Okay. Erica asked, would you please expand more about why MSAR is not a full picture of GPA and MCAT?
So the MSAR is self-reported from the medical school. So the directors of admission report that data to the AAMC to publish in the MSAR. So, right, Harvard doesn't want to admit they accept a lower GPA than Yale, right? It's a lot of reputation, right? So they're not going to share the lowest scores accepted. I remember when I was director of the UC Davis School of Medicine postbac program. I was always shocked. Like, I was there for almost 6 years. Every single year, it blew my mind. Like, I was looking at the numbers of students accepted, and my students, like 20% of the students I worked with got into UC Davis School of Medicine from our postbac program. And I was routinely like just shocked by how low our students' MCAT scores were compared to what the school was saying they accepted in the MSAR. And I'm sure that's true of all medical schools, because I see it every year. I have students accepted with significantly lower scores than they report in the MSAR.
I wonder if there's some place in really fine print in MSAR when it says that the ranges really reflect.
Self-reported.
Well, not only they're self-reported, but that they're really like the 10th to 90th percentile, or the 5th to 95th percentile, or something like that.
I think there's so much riding on reputation. I don't think they would do that. It's because
that would give them a little with integrity. That would give them a little fudge room.
It's true. I mean, because we see this all the time. Like, I'm sure you see that, Linda, that students are accepted with scores much lower than these schools are saying they accept.
All right. I actually haven't checked, but you clearly have. So I don't disagree with you. Okay. All right. Let's see what else. We have a lot of questions here. Again, some people are posting questions in the chat window. It's going to be a lot easier. We'll get through a lot more if you put them in the question window. Anonymous attendee says, I was diagnosed with a health condition at the exact same time as my low GPA year. Could I convey this in the disadvantaged portion of, or address it somewhere else?
Can you repeat the question? I'm so sorry.
Sure. I was diagnosed with a health condition at the exact same time as my low GPA year. And she writes could, but I think it really should be should. Should I convey this in the disadvantaged portion of, or address it somewhere else?
Okay. So hopefully there's an increasing trend, right? Because as long as you have a good explanation for why you got a low GPA that year, a health condition is definitely an appropriate reason. It's up to you. I don't recommend you share what it was, especially if it's a genetic condition, or if it's a chronic condition, or if it's something that could impact you in medical school. It's none of their business, and you don't have to say what it was. Another good reason not to detail the health issue is because you don't want your essay to read like a medical history, right? But there are several potential places you would include something like that. It might go in your personal statement if you're focusing on, hey, sophomore year, I got this illness, but once I, sought treatment and I improved, my GPA went up, and, by senior year, I was receiving Dean's List honors, graduated with honors, etc. That would be a great place to include it, as long as you can demonstrate improvement. It might also be appropriate depending on what your secondary essay questions are. You might want to include it there. Statement of disadvantage, it might be appropriate to include it there. It would depend on what it was, and whether it impacted you in terms of like being able to support yourself. I once had a client, and he's now a doctor. He's amazing. He had to live out of his truck and study by the light of his cab light in his truck. Like, can you imagine? I mean, and there was a point at which his family couldn't pay their electric bill. And so they would turn the lights on of the car, open the garage door, and that would like shine the light from the headlights into, I think the kitchen was there. And that's how he would get by or have light in the evenings. So, right, details like that are important to include. If your health impacted your ability to support yourself, yes, it should definitely be in the disadvantage statement.
Okay, great. And then I have heard that mentioning a learning disability in any way may negatively impact the application. Would you say that's true?
So if I just want to make sure I understand it, if having a learning disability will impact the application.
Yeah. I have heard that mentioning a learning disability in any way may negatively impact the application. Would you say that's true? I would say it depends how it
depends. Yeah. We would need more information. It would totally depend on the details.
Is it under control? Have you learned how to compensate? Have you excelled academically despite the learning disability? It could be, something that would be a perfectly appropriate topic for an adversity essay.
Yeah, it depends on the details. Sorry.
Depends on the details. Can't give you, this is one of those times when we can't give you categorical answers.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see what else we have here. I made a list of 50. I think that means she means schools to apply to. This is from Christina. Am I crazy? I agree with you about the secondaries. What if I stagger the application a bit so that I'm not flooded with secondaries all at once? What would you say? What would you say to applying to 50 schools?
Whoa, 50. I don't think I would actually really apply to that. I mean, like, I admire your courage and bravery. Wow, like that's impressive. But I think if you are more strategic in your selection, right, you want to apply to safety schools, which means that your MCAT and your GPA fall within the school's median range. You want to apply to reach schools, and I define those as medical schools where either your MCAT or your GPA falls into their median range, or dream schools. You want to have the smallest number of dream schools, right? You just want to have like 3 to 5, no more than 5, really. And those would be schools where your GPA and MCAT do not fall into any of their ranges. So like 3 years ago, I used to recommend students use the 10th percentile numbers to select schools, and people were getting accepted using that strategy. The last year or so, I was using the 25th percentile, but because of the pandemic last cycle and the large increase in the number of applicants, I recommend you use the median range. That's going to put you in a more secure place in terms of selecting schools. So in the MSAR, right, if you hover the mouse over the graph, right, that shows the average, scores accepted, if you hover the mouse, you'll see a 10th percentile pop up, a 25th percentile, the median, I think 90th percentile, and then you'll get to see sort of the range that the school's reporting.
Okay, great. We also have a question here from Simran. He asked, do you offer guidance for the Postbac SMP applications? The answer is yes.
Yeah, most definitely.
I just put in the chat window our package for Postbac programs. We also have hourly services you can find online, but the answer is definitely yes.
Yeah, I have to say, like, my success rate for students getting accepted into Postbac and master's degree programs is like pretty close to 100%. I don't know if you've looked at it, Linda, but
I know it's really high. I don't know.
It's really high. Yeah. I don't want to say 100% because I don't want to give it
no.
hope, but it's really high. Yeah.
Right. So
it helps to seek expert guidance. Yeah.
So we have a couple of questions here from Jay. He writes, can I apply without the MCAT? He's taking the MCAT in August this year. There are some schools that I believe are allowing you to get verified and even get the secondary with before the MCAT. I know last year there were a lot of schools that were doing that, but you would have to check the schools individually. Would you agree with that?
Totally. Things change, right? Everything's changing so rapidly with what's happening with the pandemic. Our numbers are good right now, thank goodness. But you never know, right? With the new variants, things can change. Hopefully they won't. But I would always, be checking the individual schools' websites. Even now, like when, as you're applying, you want to be up on the latest information. And the best way to find that is really on the school's individual websites.
Okay. Let's see. If you are disadvantaged, have a low GPA, but a good score, are your chances increased at all? Also, if submitting after July is considered to be late, why are the deadlines so much later than that? Two very different questions.
Yeah, those are majorly different questions.
Right.
So yes, you can definitely get accepted with lower scores applying as disadvantaged. Often it will help you on some campuses. We can't say all because each medical school has a different policy or approach. So some schools have like a separate committee for disadvantaged applicants, right? So they evaluate them differently. Some schools actually have a policy where if you're applying as disadvantaged they won't automatically reject your application if your scores are below the parameters that they set. Other schools have like set parameters where they just screen, they put all the applications through a screening system. And if you're out of the range, you're just, rejected. They don't even look at it. But there are some programs that have a policy that they will evaluate your application before rejecting it if you're applying as disadvantaged. So yeah, applying as disadvantaged can actually help you. And the second part of the question, you remind me what it was.
Why are the deadlines so late if you really have to get it in by July?
What would you say to that, Linda? I know I have an answer, but I'm not sure I want to share it. What would you say to that?
I think that the deadlines are based on like how late can the schools get in an application and still get out an interview invitation and process. And obviously the more applications they get, the more exclusive they look.
Yes.
So as long as they can comfortably process an application, even if it comes in quote unquote late or at a time in the process where they have given out all or virtually all their interview spots, they again, it just makes them look good. I have interviewed many, I don't know, 20, 30 at this point, med school admissions directors. I can think of only one who said, you apply when you're ready. If that's late in the cycle, it's late in the cycle. We always make sure we have spots available at the end of the cycle for the great applicants who come in then. Otherwise, they all said, apply early. Okay, so that would be, anyway, that's my take. What's your take?
My take is that it's a money-making industry. I think these applications bring in enormous amounts of money for the schools. And it just increases their budgets for what they're able to do for the community, for their medical students, right, for their programs, their special programs. So that's my pessimistic take on it.
Yeah, well, a little more cynical.
Yeah, sorry.
It's all right. That's okay. Let's see. I think also one of the idea of having a common application like the MCAS or the ACOMAS or TMDSAS is that it makes it easier for applicants. But I think it also means that people take much more of a shotgun approach to the application process, inevitably send out more applications because it's easier to do so. And therefore the numbers look that much scarier, and it contributes to a little bit of froth in the process. I think it's the law of unintended consequences getting into the act. Okay, so common apps have a downside to them. Let's see. Michael asks, in regard to the FAP program, I fit the financial requirements, but I don't seem to qualify for immigration reasons. Will the categories be expanded in the future to fit students like DACA recipients who live in the U.S. their whole lives? Worst case,
my heart goes out to you. I've actually helped DACA students get into medical school. So we should talk. There are some medical schools more open to accepting you.
Right. And he says, worst case scenario, I have to apply as an international student. How much more difficult will the application process be? It'll be more difficult, but anyway.
Yes, it is.
Go ahead, Alicia.
But there are those schools who will support you.
Yeah. All right.
And it's interesting, some of my DACA students have just been such incredible human beings because of the barriers they've had to overcome. I mean, just incredible human beings, incredible characters, incredible stories.
Right. Let's see what else we have here. Do you think the increase in number of applications last year will continue as a trend?
Oh, goodness. That is a really difficult question.
Yeah.
I should get out my crystal ball. Dust it off. What do you think? I want to hear what you have to say first.
I don't think you'll have a similar increase this year. I don't think that it'll multiply itself. I think you're going to have still a very busy year. First of all, there were many people rejected last year who are going to reapply. And then I think that there is more interest in healthcare and in being a physician. The Fauci effect was what we were all talking about a few months ago.
That's awesome.
I think it's gonna still play out. So I don't think it's going to go back to what it was in 2019, 2020.
I agree. I think because anyone who wasn't a healthcare worker had to stay at home, we had to, we were benched, right?
Right, right. We were
I think
confined.
that, yes, exactly. I think definitely like the heroism that we've seen, the fact, like that our lives depended on our healthcare workers and their assessments and knowledge and updating us on what they were finding out and improving their treatments for patients. It's amazing. We had a family member who went on a ventilator and
Oh,
we thought
wow.
for sure this person wasn't going to survive.
Yeah.
And he did, and it felt like a miracle. But they just got really good at treating patients. I think it's incredible what our healthcare workers were able to do under such difficult circumstances. So I think there is kind of like that wanting to step up and help and seeing that this is one of the best ways to do that. So I agree. I don't think there'll be a huge drop in applicants this cycle.
Great. Let's see. Sarah asks, if you apply early but have a pending MCAT score, would that put you at a disadvantage? I've researched schools I'm interested in and have a statement that they would accept an MCAT score as late as September. I know earlier the better, but I'm focused on submitting my application this month, then God willing, secondaries.
When she says a good score, does she mean MCAT score?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Are your chances increased at all? Yeah, I mean, I've seen people get in every year with scores much lower than you would think would be accepted. But applying as a disadvantage will help you if, and there's a big if here, if you apply to the right schools, to the schools who are more open to accepting disadvantaged applicants as well as students with lower scores. So you're saying if after July is considered to be late, why are the deadlines so much later?
Well,
I think we covered
that was another
part.
question.
Yeah.
That was a different
Okay.
question.
Yeah, we covered that part, didn't we?
Right, right, right. Yeah, we did.
Yeah. So I would say it depends on what the scores are, and the situation, the details of the circumstances.
Okay. Mark Nell asks, if I have a low GPA but a decent MCAT score, 508, what should be my goal in applying? And I'm going to guess by goal, he's asking, this is my interpretation. Should he apply MD or DO?
It depends on what your goals are, right? So it's so interesting because if you're willing to work hard, anything is possible. If your heart is set on MD, say you delay your application by a year and address those things that are holding you back, there's no limit to what is possible for you. If you're set on applying this cycle and you've addressed the weaknesses, depending on what your numbers are, MD might be an option, DO probably more likely, but it all depends on what timeline you're comfortable with and how much effort you've already put into improving or how much effort you're willing to put in to get into either a DO or an MD.
Right. Another option here, which I think Morgan kind of alluded to in a chat message earlier in the webinar, is to apply to some MD programs and apply to some DO programs.
Yes. Yeah.
That way you have options at MD programs and choose them carefully, choose them strategically. And then the DO programs, you'll choose strategically, but the strategy might be a little bit different because then your numbers might be actually above average. It also depends on how low your GPA is. And was there, as Alicia has emphasized, was there an upward trend to it? What was your science GPA as opposed to the overall GPA? Were there extenuating circumstances? Did you do a postbac program? Would you be willing to do a postbac program as if it's really important for you to go MD as opposed to DO? So, there's lots of things going on here that I think you need to think about. Okay. A similar question from Morgan: with a lower GPA, what MCAT? Oh, this is a different question. With a lower GPA, what MCAT score should we aim for? I completed an SMP with a 3.88 GPA and am considered disadvantaged.
Gosh, that's I'd have to look at your whole application.
Okay, I'll give you an answer, Morgan.
Yeah, I'd have to look at.
I'll give you my answer to that question is always aim for the highest score you can get.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then deal with the results.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I would say don't get attached to a number. I feel like people get set on a number and then they're devastated when they don't get that number. I would really focus on your accuracy, improving your strategy on each section. How can you solve questions for accuracy, speed that up, and then integrate a strategy that helps you increase accuracy and your speed? That often works the best. People don't think about trying it that way, but I helped run an MCAT prep program for 5 summers for UC Davis School of Medicine postbaccalaureate program. And what I noticed is like if people just take one question and just take as much time as they need and see what steps they have to take to answer it accurately, and then speed that process up, right? Start with no limit on time, then give yourself 2 minutes less than it took to solve it the first time correctly, and then 2 minutes less the third time, and then you'll start incorporating strategies that are actually unique and specific to your style that will help you maintain accuracy but speed up the time answering them correctly. And you want to really look at like maybe reading the answers first and then the question, or like there's some really funny weird ways you can approach it that will just work better for your brain.
Okay. Let's see. Matthew asked, what is an ideal number of schools to apply to? That was 20 to 25. And should I focus on in-state or out-of-state?
I would definitely apply to all of the in-state medical schools. And then the next thing you want to look at is not so much out-of-state, so to speak. It would be what percentage out-of-state students does a campus accept if you're considered out-of-state for them. Does that make sense? It's a little confusing.
Well,
so you want to look at the percent out-of-state students accepted. I wouldn't apply to programs with less than like a 30% out-of-state acceptance rate.
And actually, I'll share this. Accepted has a tool, in-state versus out-of-state. And I'll share this link for you. Here we go. You can look at the differences, and it will help you select schools. Here we go to everybody. Okay. That will help you, but yeah, you want to apply. You almost always want to apply in-state first. And with that, I want to first of all thank Alicia for an outstanding presentation. We've gone over a bit. And I also want to share a final thought, a story, and then I have a question for you folks. Okay. First of all, I want to thank you also for your time, your attention, your participation, your questions, your answers. You've been a fantastic audience. And again, thanks to Alicia for her excellent presentation. I want to share a final thought and story. Your past, especially that low stat or 2, doesn't have to define your future. I think that's the one thing that Alicia didn't say verbatim, but that comes through in her talk. You can change the stats. You can bring counter evidence of your abilities, right? Evidence that counters the misinformation, if you will, by the cause provided by the low stat, and that shows what you can do. There are also the essays, your activities, secondaries, and interviews. All these are still in your control. Make them the best they can be with our help. And now the story. Pat came to Accepted, that's a pseudonym, with good grades, but a below average MCAT for MD programs. She was doubting herself and struggling. She started working with Alicia in the spring, and that December, I received the following email from her. Again, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll do excerpts. I cannot thank Alicia enough for being such an incredible support system and mentor throughout this long and challenging process of applying to medical school. As of December, I have been accepted to an MD school. I am so thrilled and grateful for the opportunity to work with Alicia. The services offered through Accepted are worth it because the consultants are knowledgeable, supportive, honest, and thorough. I would have not have been able to accomplish an MD admission without Alicia's help during the application process, and especially preparing for interviews. I felt confident in my ability to, all right, so you can read the rest of it. I would highly recommend working with Alicia to achieve your medical school goals. And she was later accepted to an additional medical school. Pat had a below average stat, lots of doubts and nerves when facing interviews. She turned to Accepted for guidance and support, and she received a wonderful Christmas present, medical school acceptance. She's on the path to her dream career. Imagine yourself in her shoes, having a trusted guide and mentor as you go through the primary and secondary applications, having someone provide mock interviews and insightful feedback so that you approach your real interview prepared and confident, and then happily sharing news of medical school acceptance, not only with your consultant, but with your family and your friends. Do as she and so many other applicants, just like you, have done over the last 27 years now. Take the steps that she took and get accepted. Those are the steps on your screen. And now the question for you is, we really appreciate, again, your time and your attention. You've attended the whole presentation, the pitch and the question and answer, and even the mini pitch at the end. You're clearly interested in what we have to say. Thank you. If you're not an accepted client or planning to become one, could you share, please, what is causing you to hesitate about engaging with an accepted mentor like Alicia? Yes, we do provide consultations for Canadian applicants applying to U.S. medical schools as well. We have one consultant in particular who's lived in Canada and actually is now back in Canada, but lived in the United States for many years and is American by birth. The cost of the program. And that is definitely a real concern. Brianna, I don't minimize it at all. We're not cheap because we have very good people working for us, like Alicia. But we do have now a firm, which means you can stretch out the payments over up to 36 months. You can also just purchase a consultation and get some advice. That's a $340, which is less than the cost of, well, it's right about the same cost of 2 medical school and secondary applications if you're not using the fee assistance program. So if you either don't apply to 2 schools that you don't have a chance at, or you improve your strategy and get into more schools, then you'll definitely make up the cost of the service. I think the biggest benefit of the service, though, is that if you get in a year earlier, you'll have an additional year of post-MD earnings, salaries, than if you wait. Most of you are at the beginning of your careers and you're just not earning as much. And then somebody posted that she's actually making good money right now. She's working. She's going to be a career changer. That's fantastic. But most of you are not in that situation. The other thing you should note is if you're wondering about the real value of one-on-one consultations, if you are considering the service, take advantage of the option to have a free consultation, which we do offer for those people seriously considering our services. And you can, again, if you go to the URL on the screen, you'll see the option for a free consultation. Shannon writes, too late to use the service for this application cycle. No, we do have some consultants available who can still work with you for this application cycle. Or if you are considering that you don't feel that you can get it in this cycle and you want to prepare for next cycle, we can give you some advice that will really set you up for success for the following cycle. Like some of the questions, should you do the postbac program? Should you do an informal postbac program, a formal postbac program? You can get advice from Alicia or from some of the other consultants who have postbac program experience at a fraction of the cost of a formal postbac program. Anybody else have some insight into what's causing you to hesitate? I would really appreciate it. Okay. In that case, once again, I'm going to thank Alicia. I'm going to thank all of you for your time and your attention. And I want to wish you the best of luck in the med school application process. And if you would like to work with us, we'd love to hear from you. Take care. Good night, everybody.